For the past 3 years, I was a ghost. Not the kind that haunts old houses or rattles chains in the night. The kind that gets a death certificate filed on his behalf while he's still breathing in a hospital bed 1,200 miles from home, unable to speak his own name. My name is Walter Crane. I am 63 years old. I built a manufacturing company from nothing, a metal fabrication plant in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, that employed over 200 people and was valued at just under $18 million when I last walked through its doors. I built it with my hands, my savings, and 30 years of my life. I signed every contract, shook every hand, learned every employee's name and the names of their kids. I also had a son, Daniel, 34 years old, an engineer, the kind of young man who still calls his father on Sunday mornings just to talk. Had, past tense. That's what I thought for a long time. When the ambulance pulled me out of the wreckage of a collapsed scaffolding structure at our north site in January of 2022, I had a traumatic brain injury, 3 broken ribs, a shattered left wrist, and internal bleeding that required emergency surgery twice in the first 48 hours. I was in a medically induced coma for 11 weeks. When I finally came out of it, I was in a rehabilitation facility in Western Ohio, transferred there after complications, far from my home, far from everything I knew. Here's the part I need you to understand, because this is the part that people always ask about first. Why didn't I call? Why didn't anyone come for me? When I arrived at the facility, I had no identification on me. The emergency workers had logged me as a John Doe. During the coma, someone, a hospital administrator, who was later let go for exactly this kind of error, transposed my intake paperwork with another patient. When my brother Raymond was contacted as my emergency contact, he was told a Walter Crane had died during surgery. The other patient, not me. I didn't know any of this until much later. What I knew was that I woke up in a room that smelled like antiseptic and old carpet, with a television mounted too high on the wall and a therapist named Gloria who had the patience of someone who had seen far worse. I knew my name. I knew my son's face. I knew the smell of the shop floor at Crane Fabrication, metal shavings, and machine oil and coffee that had been sitting on the burner since 6 in the morning. But I had gaps, large ones. My speech was slow for the first 4 months. My short-term memory was unreliable. I could not reliably recall phone numbers, addresses, login credentials for anything. I told the staff my name repeatedly, Walter Crane, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. They searched. They found a death certificate. They found an obituary that my brother Raymond had published in the local paper 3 weeks after my accident. They assumed I was confused. They were kind about it, but they assumed I was confused. It took me 14 months to prove I was alive. That sounds almost funny when I say it like that. 14 months to prove I was alive. But that is the truth. It took a visiting neurologist named Dr. Yun, who finally took me seriously, ran the right queries through the right systems, cross-referenced my fingerprints, which were on file, from a federal contractor certification I'd done back in 2009, and then made a phone call that changed everything. By the time I walked out of that rehabilitation facility on a cold Tuesday morning in March of 2024, I had been legally dead for over 2 years. My brother Raymond had been running my company for all of it. I didn't go home immediately. I know that might be hard to understand. But Gloria had warned me that returning to an environment of high stress before I had fully stabilized could set back my recovery significantly. And the social worker assigned to my case wanted to make sure there was legal support in place before I walked back into a situation that was, at minimum, going to be complicated. So I spent 6 weeks living in an extended stay motel in York, working with an attorney named Catherine Holloway, who specialized in exactly these kinds of cases: wrongful death declarations, estate fraud, identity disputes. Catherine made some calls. What she found was not what either of us expected. Raymond had not simply been maintaining the business in my absence. He had restructured it. Within 4 months of my supposed death, he had dissolved the original LLC, reformed it as Crane Industrial Solutions LLC, with himself as the sole owner of record, renegotiated all major contracts in his own name, and liquidated my personal life insurance policy, which he was the secondary beneficiary on for a payout of $1.4 million. My house, a property I had owned outright since paying off the mortgage in 2018, had been transferred to a holding company Raymond created, a holding company where he held every share. My son, Daniel, who had been working as a senior engineer at Crane Fabrication for 6 years, who I had intended to gradually hand the company over to, who knew every system and every process in that building better than anyone, was now working on the floor. Not in the engineering office, not in management, on the shop floor, running a metal press 8 hours a day, classified as a general laborer. When Catherine told me that last part, I had to ask her to repeat it. Daniel, my son, on the floor of the company I built, running a press as a laborer. I sat in Catherine's office for a long moment without saying anything. Outside the window, the city was doing what cities do in early spring, gray and reluctant, not quite ready to commit to warmth. A truck went by on the street below. Someone honked. How did that happen? I finally said. Catherine looked at her notes. She had a way of choosing her words carefully that I had come to appreciate. From what we've been able to piece together so far, she said, your brother removed Daniel from his engineering position approximately 8 months after your declared death. The stated reason on record was a performance review. But Daniel did not leave the company. He accepted the floor position. Why would he do that? She hesitated. We don't have complete information yet. But there are some indicators that suggest Daniel may have felt he had no choice. I found out why 2 weeks later, when I finally saw my son for the first time in over 3 years. I want to tell you about that morning in a way that does it justice, but I'm not sure I have the words. I had asked Catherine to arrange it somewhere neutral, somewhere that wasn't my house or the company or anywhere Raymond controlled. We met at a diner on Route 30. One of those places with a pie case by the register and coffee that comes in a thick ceramic mug, whether you want it that way or not. I got there early. I sat in a booth by the window and watched the parking lot and tried to breathe normally. Daniel pulled in at 8:43. I watched him get out of his truck, an older model, more rust on the wheel wells than I remembered, and walk toward the entrance. He looked older. That shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. There were lines around his eyes that weren't there before. His shoulders had the kind of set to them that you see in men who are carrying something heavy and have been carrying it so long they've forgotten what it felt like to put it down. He saw me through the window. He stopped walking. For a moment, he just stood there on the sidewalk, and I could see his mouth move, not words, just breath, just the shape of something he couldn't say yet. Then he came inside. He sat down across from me and stared at me for a long time without speaking. His eyes were wet. He pressed his fist to his mouth. I looked for you, he said finally. His voice was rough. When Uncle Raymond said you were gone, I didn't believe it. I kept looking for records. I kept calling the hospitals in Pennsylvania, in Ohio, he stopped. Pressed his fist to his mouth again. I thought I was going crazy. I thought I was just refusing to accept it. You weren't going crazy, I said. I was in Ohio the whole time, under the wrong name on the wrong paperwork. He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a sob. Uncle Raymond told us the Ohio hospital had confirmed it. He said he had spoken to the attending physician. I let that sit between us for a moment. Then I said, he lied. Daniel nodded slowly, like he'd suspected it but hadn't let himself fully believe it until right now. We talked for almost 3 hours. The coffee got cold, and we ordered more, and then let that get cold too. He told me everything, or most of everything. He told me how Raymond had moved quickly after the declared death, how he had come to Daniel with a stack of documents within weeks, how he had been smooth and organized about all of it in a way that left Daniel feeling like he was stumbling through mud. Daniel had been grieving. He had been 31 years old, and his father had just died, and everything was moving too fast. When Raymond removed Daniel from the engineering position, he did it in a meeting with 2 other people in the room, a human resources person Raymond had hired and an attorney Raymond had retained. The performance review was detailed and formal and had clearly been prepared in advance. Daniel told me he'd sat in that meeting feeling like the ground had opened up under his chair. He offered me the floor position, Daniel said. He said it was that or termination. And he shook his head. I know how that sounds, Dad. I know. But I needed the health insurance. I looked at him. Your daughter, I said. He nodded. He looked down at the table. Lily was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes 8 months before your accident. She was 7. She needs insulin, continuous monitoring equipment, supplies. It's a lot. The insurance through Crane covers it. Without it, we're looking at over $2,000 a month out of pocket. And there it was. Raymond knew. He had known about Lily's diagnosis. He had sat at our family table at Christmas that year, had seen the glucose monitor on her arm, had heard Margaret explain the new routine to everyone. He had filed that information away and used it. Daniel didn't put it together that way initially. But then, one evening, about 6 months into working the press, he had stayed late and overheard Raymond on a phone call in the main office. Raymond was talking to someone. And Daniel heard his own name, and he heard Raymond say, and Daniel repeated this to me, word for word, because he said he had repeated it to himself every night since. As long as he needs that coverage for the kid, he's not going anywhere. Daniel hadn't confronted Raymond. I understood why. He had a wife, a daughter with a serious medical condition, and a job that covered her treatment. Raymond held every card and knew it. I sat with my son in that diner on Route 30 and I felt something settle into place in my chest. Not anger, though anger was there too, banked and controlled like a furnace with the vents mostly closed. Something more like clarity, the clarity of knowing exactly what needed to happen next. I need you to listen to me, I told Daniel. And I need you to not say anything to Raymond. Not yet. Can you do that? He looked at me like he was still not entirely sure I was real. Yes, he said. Good. I have an attorney. Her name is Catherine Holloway. She has been building a case for 6 weeks, and she is very good at her job. Before this is over, I am going to take back everything that was taken from me, and I am going to make sure that what happened to you and to Lily can never happen again. Daniel looked out the window. His jaw was tight. Then he looked back at me and said, How do I know Raymond won't find out you're alive before you're ready? Because, I said, he's about to get a certified letter from the Pennsylvania Department of Vital Statistics, informing him that a clerical error has been identified in a previously filed death certificate, and that a hearing has been scheduled to review the record. By the time he understands what that means, we will already have filed in civil court. It took another 3 weeks of preparation. Catherine was thorough, in a way that I came to understand was her defining characteristic. She did not move until she was certain, but when she moved, she was devastating. We obtained the original hospital intake records from Ohio, the fingerprint match documentation, the testimony of Dr. Yoon, and the records showing the administrative error that had caused the misidentification. We obtained the transfer documents for my house, the LLC restructuring filings, the insurance payout records. We obtained Raymond's phone records legally through the civil discovery process, which included the call Daniel had overheard and several others that were equally illuminating. We also obtained, through a separate request, the employment records from Crane Industrial Solutions showing Daniel's demotion and his current classification and salary. A man with a mechanical engineering degree and 6 years of specialized experience in metal fabrication, classified as general labor, earning $17 an hour. On a Thursday morning in late April, I walked into the building I had built for the first time in over 2 years. I want to tell you what it felt like to stand in that parking lot again. The building is not beautiful. It is a large industrial structure, corrugated metal siding, loading docks on the south face, a small glass-fronted office section at the entrance that I always thought looked a little too fancy for the rest of it, but that my wife Margaret had talked me into back in 2007. The sign above the entrance now said Crane Industrial Solutions. In new lettering, the old sign had just said Crane Fabrication, which I had always preferred, more honest. I stood in that parking lot and looked at the sign with my name on it above a door I no longer legally had the right to walk through, and I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Not grief, not anger, something older than both of those. The feeling of a man who has been patient because he had no other option and has now run out of patience. Catherine was beside me. Behind us were two other attorneys from her firm, a process server, and a representative from the Pennsylvania Secretary of State's office. We had made an appointment under a neutral pretext. Catherine's office had called ahead, saying they were there to discuss a compliance matter related to the LLC registration. Raymond's assistant had confirmed the appointment. We walked in. The front desk was staffed by a young woman I didn't recognize. Raymond had clearly changed the administrative staff. She looked up when we came in and smiled the practiced smile of someone managing a busy front desk. "I'm here to see Raymond Crane," Catherine said. "Of course. Can I get your name?" "Catherine Holloway." "I have a 10 o'clock. The young woman made the call. We waited in the lobby. I looked through the glass partition that separated the office section from the shop floor. The sound of the presses was familiar in the way that the heartbeat of a place you've built always is a rhythm you internalize without realizing it. I could see the floor from where I stood. I scanned the machines. I found Daniel at the third press from the left. He was wearing safety glasses and work gloves, feeding sheet metal through with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done something so many times it has become automatic. He was a senior engineer. He had designed process improvements that had increased our output efficiency by 11% in 2019, and he was feeding sheet metal through a press for $17 an hour. I looked at him for a long moment. He didn't look up. He didn't know I was here today. Then I heard footsteps on the office stairs, and Raymond came through the door from the upper level. He had put on weight in the years I'd been gone. His hair was fully gray now, though it had been mostly gray before. He was wearing a button-down shirt and slacks that said, "I run this place now," a departure from the jeans and flannel he'd worn when he worked under me. He had his sales smile on the one I'd watched him use his entire life, the smile that was charming enough to make you trust it before you'd thought about it too carefully. He saw Catherine first. He extended his hand and said something about being glad she could come out in person. Standard, smooth. Then his eyes moved past her and found me. The smile left his face in stages. First the eyes, which went very still, then the set of his jaw, which changed, then the color of his skin, which did something I have only seen a handful of times in my life. It did not exactly drain. It shifted, became a gray-white that belonged on a man who has just been told something he cannot process. He said my name, not as a greeting, not as a question. Exactly. He said it the way you say something when the word is leaving your mouth before your brain has caught up with what it means. "Walter." "Hello, Raymond," I said. He looked from me to Catherine and back to me, and his mouth opened and closed. Behind him, his assistant was watching from the top of the stairs with the expression of someone who understands that something significant is happening but cannot yet determine what. "I don't understand," Raymond said. His voice had changed completely. The salesman was gone. You were. "I was in a rehabilitation facility in Western Ohio for 14 months, I said, under a name that wasn't mine because of a hospital administrative error. I have the documentation if you'd like to see it, though I suspect my attorney has already sent copies to your counsel." He looked at Catherine. Something was moving behind his eyes calculation, I think. The part of him that had always been a step ahead trying to find a step ahead here, some exit, some angle. "Raymond Crane," Catherine said, stepping forward. "You are being served with a civil complaint filed in the Court of Common Pleas of Dauphin County, alleging fraud, conversion of assets, wrongful appropriation of life insurance proceeds, and tortious interference with employment, among other claims. You are also being notified that the Pennsylvania Department of Vital Statistics has initiated a formal correction proceeding regarding the erroneous death certificate filed in January 2022, and that the Secretary of State's office is conducting a review of the LLC restructuring documentation filed during the period covered by that erroneous certificate. The process server stepped forward and placed the documents in Raymond's hand. Raymond took them automatically, the way you take something when your hands are still working even though the rest of you has gone somewhere else entirely. The shop floor was visible through the glass behind him. I could see that the nearest workers had stopped. The sound of one press had cut out. Word travels fast in a place like that. Bodies had turned. Raymond was still looking at the documents. He seemed to be reading without taking anything in. His lips moved slightly. I said, "You used Daniel's daughter's medical condition to keep him in a position that had nothing to do with his qualifications. You knew that without the company health insurance, he couldn't cover Lily's treatment. You used a 9-year-old girl's insulin dependency as leverage to keep my son silent and compliant. I want you to understand that I know that. I want you to understand that I know exactly what you did, and why you did it, and when." Raymond looked up from the documents. His expression had settled into something that was almost nothing, a blankness that I recognized as the face a man makes when he has run out of performance. "I thought you were dead," he said. Quiet. Not quite an excuse. Something smaller than an excuse. "You published the obituary 3 weeks after the accident," I said. "The hospital in Ohio had already logged my intake by then under the wrong name. You didn't confirm with them directly. You received one phone call from a hospital administrator who misread the paperwork, and you published my obituary before anyone had confirmed anything with a coroner or a physician. You moved faster than grief, Raymond. You moved like a man who had been waiting." He didn't answer that. I looked at him for another moment. Then I turned and walked through the door to the shop floor. I heard someone call out my name as I came through Tommy Reyes, who had worked our welding station since 2011, and who I had attended the baptism of 2 of his children. He said it in the same way Raymond had said it, except where Raymond's voice had been hollowed out. Tommy's was full of something electric, something you could almost hear ignite. "Mr. Crane? Is that Mr. Crane?" "It's me, Tommy," I said. He stared at me. Then he laughed, a short and startled sound, and said, "Holy," and stopped himself, and looked around like he wanted to share this with someone, wanted to confirm it with the nearest person. I walked toward the third press from the left. Daniel had stopped the machine. He was standing with his hands at his sides, his safety glasses pushed up on his forehead, and he was looking at me with an expression that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. It was the face of a man who has grieved a loss so deeply that the loss has become a permanent condition, a weight he has learned to walk with, and who is now being told that the thing he lost might not be gone after all. The adjustment is not instant. The adjustment is enormous. You can see it working in real time. He didn't say anything. I walked up to him and put my hands on his shoulders and said, "I'm sorry it took so long." He made a sound, and then he grabbed me in the kind of hug that doesn't have anything self-conscious about it. The kind that belongs to a child embracing a parent, even when the child is 34 years old and bigger than his father. I felt his hands gripping the back of my jacket. I felt him shake once, like something releasing. Around us, the shop floor had gone completely still. The legal proceedings took 7 months from the day we walked in. Raymond's attorney was competent and did what competent attorneys do, which was delay and request continuances and attempt to file motions that Catherine handled with what I can only describe as the focused patience of someone who has seen this playbook before and has already written the response. Raymond's primary defense was essentially that he had acted in good faith based on the information available to him at the time of my declared death, that he had operated the business in what he believed to be a legitimate capacity, that any restructuring had been done to preserve the company's value during a period of uncertainty. Catherine took that argument apart piece by piece. The phone records were particularly useful. The call Daniel had overheard about Lily's insulin coverage was there, time-stamped and logged. There were other calls, too. Calls to the insurance company about the life insurance payout, calls to a real estate attorney about the property transfer, all made within days of Raymond receiving the initial notification of my supposed death. Catherine stood in front of the judge and laid out a timeline. And the timeline told a story that had no innocent interpretation. The phone records from the first week after my accident were particularly damning. 3 calls to the hospital in Ohio. But the calls were short, 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 4 minutes. Not the calls of a man trying to verify details. Short calls, confirmation calls, the kind of calls where you ask one question and hang up. The hospital's records showed that each call had been connected to a general information line, not to attending physicians or the department handling my case. Raymond had not tried to confirm my death. He had tried to confirm that no one was going to contradict it. The judge made her findings on a Wednesday in November. Fraud in the conveyance of real property, conversion of insurance proceeds, wrongful appropriation, the LLC restructuring was voided. The property transfer was unwound. The insurance payout was ordered repaid with statutory interest. In addition to the civil judgment, the district attorney's office, which had been monitoring the civil case with interest, filed criminal charges 3 weeks later. I won't tell you what Raymond's face looked like in that courtroom because I had decided before I ever walked in that I was not going to spend the moment watching him. I watched Daniel instead, who was sitting in the gallery, and I watched him exhale a long, slow breath, like a man surfacing after a very long time underwater. I got my company back. I got my house back. I got my name back legally, formally. The death certificate corrected and expunged from every record where it had appeared. The first thing I did when the property transfer was reversed and the deed was back in my name was drive to the house and sit in the driveway for a while. It's a house I bought in 1998. Margaret and I had raised Daniel in it. It has a front porch that looks east, which means coffee in the morning sun, and a backyard that backs up to a thin row of trees that separates us from the neighbors. Nothing remarkable. My house. Margaret had moved out during the legal proceedings at my request. I had wanted her removed from any situation Raymond might try to use as leverage, and had been staying with her sister in Mechanicsburg. She came back on the day the deed cleared. We stood on the front porch, and she held my hand and didn't say much. And I didn't say much either. And the light was doing that late November thing, where it comes in low and golden, even in the cold. And I thought about the 14 months in Ohio when I was working to remember who I was, and the months after that in a motel room working with Catherine, and all the time in between when I was a ghost. I didn't feel like a ghost anymore. Daniel returned to work at the company, the real company, Crane Fabrication, which I re-registered as Director of Operations, not Senior Engineer. Director of Operations. He had earned that and more. His first act in the new role was to restructure the company health benefits plan, in consultation with an insurance broker, to make sure that no employee with a dependent who had a serious medical condition could ever be put in the position Daniel had been put in, where the coverage was the chain and the employer was the lock. He told me about that change on a Sunday morning phone call. I am 63 years old. I lost 3 years of my life to a hospital administrative error and my brother's greed. I lost time with my son. I lost time with my granddaughter, Lily, who is now 10 and wears her glucose monitor on her left arm and corrects me when I mispronounce things, which she does with great cheerfulness and no mercy. I do not have a tidy way to wrap this up for you. What happened to me was a series of failures, a system that couldn't find me when I needed to be found, a family member who chose greed over every obligation, and a set of circumstances that conspired to keep a man from his own life for 3 years. I was lucky. Lucky that Dr. Yoon took me seriously. Lucky that Catherine Holloway was good at her job. Lucky that my son was still in the building, that he hadn't walked away, that he had stayed close to the thing his father built, even when that thing had been turned against him. People ask me if I'm angry. I tell them yes, but it's a managed anger now, the kind you put somewhere useful rather than somewhere that eats you. I'm more interested in what comes after the anger, the Sunday morning phone calls. The front porch in the morning light. Lily correcting my pronunciation of words she learned in school this week. People ask me what I would tell someone in a similar situation. I tell them, be patient, document everything, and hire the best attorney you can find. I tell them that the legal system is slow and imperfect and sometimes exhausting, but it has mechanisms that work when you know how to use them. And Catherine Holloway taught me how to use them. People ask me about Raymond. I tell them he is awaiting sentencing. I tell them that I hope, genuinely, that whatever comes next for him contains enough honest reflection to understand what he cost his family. Not for his sake, for mine. It is easier to move forward when you are not spending energy wishing someone harm that has already been assigned to them by a process larger than your wishes. The last time I walked through the shop floor at Crane Fabrication, Tommy Reyes called out from the welding station and asked if I wanted coffee. I said yes. He made it the way he always has too strong, in a mug that says something about bass fishing, set on the edge of his workbench next to a photograph of his kids. We stood there for a while and talked about nothing important, the hum of the machines around us, the smell of metal and oil and coffee that has been sitting on the burner since 6 in the morning. I am home. I know exactly where I am. That is not a small thing. That is, as it turns out, nearly everything.